I'm just going to give everybody a second to file in and grab a seat. There should be seats for everybody. So I just want to welcome everybody again. This is very, very exciting for us. My name is Teresa Zorro, and I am the Director of Publicity at Random House, and it's my incredible team that puts this together. And it's incredible. And this day is a professional high note for me, because we've been planning this for a long time, probably about 9 months, and so much hard work and dedication has gone into making the day so special. Before we start the programming, I really do want to say thank you to the Random House Events team and everybody at Random House, everybody here today in Seattle, everybody in the office. We even have a crew back in the office who's running all the social media, so hi to the girls in New York. Really incredible. Thank you so much. I want to give a special shout out to Kate Childs, who some of you probably met. Kate is our events angel. She really helped conceptualize this, and the fine touches and the details are really Kate's. So, Kate, we love you, and thank you for helping make this a special day. I also want to thank all of the partners who've helped participate throughout the day. So we have many partners, and those are all listed on the back of our program. So hopefully you will take a look at that, and some folks will be here throughout the day to present. And then I give a special shout out to Stars, our new media partner. Yes. So Random House has formed a really wonderful relationship with Stars. This has sort of been just a beautiful marriage, and we're so thrilled that they are excited to be part of this. When we called and we asked them and we told them about it, they were right on board. And so I feel that today is going to be filled with lots of fun little nuggets, particularly from Stars, that is going to make everyone really happy. So thank you to Stars, and we'll hear more from them throughout the day. And I guess the most important thank you has to go to someone who really needs no introduction. So I would like to welcome our guest of honor, Miss Diana Gabaldon.
Well, that's a much more enthusiastic greeting than I used to get back when I taught human anatomy and physiology. Maybe because it's an hour later than I used to teach. Now, back in the day, I did teach these big classes, and I would have an auditorium full of this many people, but it would be 8 o'clock in the morning, and it would all be people taking it as a science elective. Everybody took it as a science elective, including the football team, because they thought it would be easy, so I'd come in the morning. They always sat in the front row, and they'd be there sound asleep, these big inanimate blobs of flesh. And so I'd walk up to the front of the podium and say, well, this morning, gentlemen, we're going to discuss the history of contraception. And they'd all start blinking. And say, in days of old, when knights were bold, and condoms not invented, they wrapped old socks around their cocks, and babies were prevented. Well, thank you. Yeah, it worked on the football players, too. That we're all awake and so forth. The first question people usually ask me is, well, how did you get from being a university professor to being a novelist? Because, it seems to them that these are two completely different things. Being a scientist is all this, cold, clinical, logical, tidy sort of thing, and being a novelist is this, colorful, wonderful, touchy-feely, intuitive sort of thing. And it's not, they're both the same thing, really. It's just, science and art are two faces of the same thing. It's the ability to see patterns is what they both rest on. Almost every really good scientist I know is also a very good artist in one way or another. They play music, or they draw, or they paint, or something like that. And vice versa, people who are very good artists usually would make good scientists. It never occurs to them to try because there's too much school involved, but but they could. Anyway, I have known since the age of 8 that I was supposed to be a novelist. You know, it's just one of these things you just know if you're lucky. Not everybody does, but I was one of the lucky ones, and I did know. However, I came from a very conservative family background. My father was fond of saying to me, "Well, you're such a poor judge of character," he said. You're bound to marry some bum," he said. So be sure you get a good education so you can support your children." So with this going on at home, I thought perhaps I wouldn't announce that I wanted to be a novelist. So I didn't know this was sort of financially iffy. And so I got a PhD in scientific, well, let's see, what is my PhD in? It's in quantitative behavioral ecology. That's just animal behavior with a lot of statistics. Don't worry about it. But anyway, I liked science. I was good at it. I enjoyed research. I loved to teach. That's the only thing I miss from academia is the teaching, which is why I like to do writers' conferences now and then. But I still wanted to be a novelist. And when I turned 35, I said, well, you know, Mozart was dead at 36. Maybe you better get a move on here. And so I said, all right, on my next birthday, I will begin writing a novel. Because to this point, I had written a lot of stuff. You can't get a PhD in quantitative behavioral ecology without writing a lot of stuff. In fact, my PhD dissertation was a 400-page opus entitled Nest Site Selection in the Pinyon Jay, Gymnorhinus cyanocephalus. Or as my husband said, why birds build nests where they do and who cares anyway. And, you know, I'd written scientific articles, and I'm being distracted by all of the lovely flowers and so forth. Yes, thank you to all of the Random House people. They've just done a fabulous job putting this together. Have a wonderful time today. Yeah, very, very good. You're going to enjoy it. Yes, I will be signing books all day, but I will enjoy you. It'll be fine. Yeah, so anyway, I had written all of this stuff over the years, you know, scientific journal articles, scholarly articles, comic books for Walt Disney. That was sort of off the beaten track, but yeah, well, thank you. And no one had ever shown me how to write any of this stuff. I had just looked at several examples, and then I wrote one, and if it didn't look quite right, I poked it till it did. And I said, well, you've been reading novels for 30-odd years. Surely if you write one, you will recognize it. I said, okay. So obviously the best way to learn to write a novel is to write a novel. So, all right, on my next birthday, I will begin writing a novel. It's not for publication. I'm not going to even tell anyone I'm doing it. I just need to know, what does it take, you know, to write a novel in terms of daily commitment and mental discipline and you know, organization and research and all that kind of stuff. And I need to have the experience of writing an entire novel to know whether I really want to do this or not. So I said, okay, there's a practice book. So what shall I write? So I read everything and lots of it, and I was thinking, well, you know, I read maybe more mysteries than anything else. Maybe I should write a mystery. I said, no, mysteries have plots. I'm not sure I can do that. And so I said, what's the easiest possible kind of thing I could write for practice? No point making it hard. So after a bit of thought, I said, well, for me, perhaps historical fiction would be the thing. Because I was a research professor, I knew my way around a library. And I said, it seems easier to look things up than to make them up. And if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record. Which actually works pretty well. And so I said, fine, historical novel, where shall I set this? Because I don't have any background in history, just the 6 hours of Western civilization they make you take as an undergrad. So, you know, any time would do as well as another. I'd have to look it all up anyway. So I was casting around looking for an interesting time and place to set this hypothetical novel. And I happened to see a really old Doctor Who rerun on public television. Yeah, I'm glad Doctor Who is getting more widespread these days. It used to be that with a U.S. audience, I'd have to stop at this point and explain who Doctor Who is. Whereas in the UK, it was never any problem. Yeah, who is your favorite doctor? Mine's David Tennant. Yeah, he's good. Oh, yeah, I loved Eccleston. It was too bad he was so short. Yeah, yeah. I mean, in time, that is. Though speaking of short, the inspiration for Outlander was actually one of the very old Patrick Troughton episodes, the second Doctor. And Patrick Troughton was probably even shorter than I am. But in this particular really old show, which has to have been done 50-odd years ago, the Doctor had picked up a young companion, a Scotsman from 1745. This was an 18, 19-year-old young man who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, that's kind of fetching. And I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church. But I said, I said, well, it really doesn't matter where you set this book. It's, just pick a point and get started. So I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century. And so that's where I began, knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century, having no plot, no outline, and no characters. Nothing but the rather vague images conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt, which is, of course, very powerful and compelling image. In fact, some years ago when Breath of Snow and Ashes came out, that was a very lucky book for me. It ended up as #1 on the bestseller lists of 4 countries, and yeah, thank you. Yes. Thank you. Yes, thanks to the kind efforts of people like you. But it also won me several awards. I won a Quill Award in the science fiction, fantasy, and horror category, for which I beat out George R.R. Martin and Stephen King. I was kind of proud of that, Mind you, this is one of the same books that the Romance Writers of America gave me a Best Book of the Year award for. But I also won this German award called the Corina International Prize for Fiction, which sounds very cool. And it was. I got to go to Germany and accept the award. And while I was there, the German publisher had me interviewed by absolutely everybody in the German press, from tabloid newspapers to their equivalent of Vanity Fair. And toward the end of this long week, I was just kind of going like this, staring at people with glazed eyes because I'd been talking so much. But I was being interviewed by some gentleman from a literary journal. And he said, I've read all of your books. He said, your characters are so tremendous. Your narrative drive is so thrilling. And your imagery is just transcendental. And I'm thinking, yes, go on. And instead, he paused and he said, there's just this one thing, I wonder. Can you explain to me what is the appeal of a man in a kilt? Well, he was a man and a German, so I was really tired, or I might not have said it, but I just looked at him for a minute, and I said, well, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against a wall with him in a minute. I told that story to Sam Hewen, and he turned white. Yeah, then he turned red. And then he started wearing his kilt everywhere. Yeah, so anyway, very powerful and compelling image. But 3 weeks after this trip, I'm at home and I get a bunch of press clippings from this journey, including that one. I recognize the man's name. And I read German, but very slowly. But the publisher had put a Post-it note in English on the top. And she said, I don't know what you told this man, but I think he is in love with you. So I guess it was a good article. But anyway, that's where I began writing, was with the man in the kilt. And I called him Jamie because the Doctor Who character was named Jamie McCrimmon, and so that's where the name Jamie came from. He had no last name for a long time because I knew nothing about Scotland in the 18th century. But I went immediately to the library and started looking up Scotland, 18th century islands. And the card catalog had just barely been made electronic, so it was a little easier than it would have been earlier. But up came 38 references with similar call numbers. So I went to those shelves, and here's 400 books on Scotland, culture, language, history, customs, geography, anything you want. So I just tiptoed along and took out anything that looked interesting, and that's where I began doing my research. Now, the only thing I knew about writing novels at the time is that they should have conflict. And so I was looking for that. Well, you don't look for conflict in Scotland in the 18th century for very long without running smack into Bonnie Prince Charlie. And I said, all right, the Jacobite Rising, yeah, that looks like plenty of conflict. Good, we'll do that. And so I was saying, well, Jacobites, Scotsmen, we must have a lot of Scotsmen, of course, because of the kilt factor. But, it would be a good idea if we had a female character to play off these guys, then we'll have sexual tension. That's conflict. That's good. And so I said, all right. And on my basis of 3 days research, I said, it looks like it was the Scots versus the English. So if we make her an English woman, we will have lots of conflict. So the third day of writing, I introduced this English woman. woman. No idea who she was, what she was doing there, how she got in the story. But I loosed her into a cottage full of Scotsmen to see what she'd do. Okay? And they're all crouched around the fire muttering to each other, and when she walked in, they all turned around and stared at her. And I was thinking, why? Does she look funny? What's going on? And one of them drew himself up, and he said, "My name's Dougal Mackenzie, and who might you be?" And without my stopping to think, I just typed, "My name's Claire Elizabeth Beecham, and who the hell are you?" And I said, "Well, you know, you don't sound at all like an 18th century person." So I fought with her for several pages, trying to beat her into shape and make her talk like a historical person, but she wasn't having any. She just kept making smart-ass modern remarks. And she also took over and started telling the story herself. And so I said, "Well, I'm not going to fight with you all the way through this book." I said, "No one's ever going to see this. It doesn't matter what bizarre thing I do." I said, "Go ahead and be modern. I'll figure out how you got there later." So it's all her fault that there's time travel in these books. So that's where I began writing, and I didn't stop. I had only 2 rules for myself when I began. I said, rule 1 is that I will do the absolute best I can every day. You know, the fact that it's a practice book does not mean, you know, that you should write it sloppily or because you're not going to learn anything doing that. And, you know, how will I know if I'm any good if I'm not doing my best? And second rule is that I won't stop. I will write the whole thing. You know, no matter how bad I think it is, I will write the whole thing to have an idea of what it takes to write a novel. And so I proceeded on that assumption. But I was not going to tell anybody about it. Now, I need to digress here for a moment. There's a reason I write long books. It's because I like digressions. But going back to my academic career, I had actually sort of slid sideways and become a, quote, expert in scientific computation. All I can say about that is it's really easy to be an expert if there's only 6 people in the world who do what you do. This was like the early 1980s. You know, microcomputers, as they were then called, were just barely beginning to seep into academia, and they'd been in industry only a short time. And there was no software for doing scientific work. Everybody who did that had to do their own. And as a result of several accidents I won't go into, I had spent 18 months of my life writing Fortran programs to analyze the contents of bird gizzards. And the upshot of this was an 800-page monograph on the dietary habits of the birds of the Colorado River Valley and all of these Fortran programs. And I said to myself, well, there's maybe 5 other people in the whole world who are interested in bird gizzards, but it would save all of them 18 months worth of effort if they knew about these programs. Why is there no means by which we can share that information? So I started a journal, a scholarly journal called Science Software Quarterly. And now, as it is, to digress in the other direction, I did not marry a bum. I married a very nice man, whom I still have 42 years later. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah. Yes, I'm 62 if you're trying to work that one out. Yeah. And as I say, very nice man. But he did quit work 3 months after our first child was born in order to start his own business. And I do have to say that in terms of financial stability, there's not that much to choose between an entrepreneur and a bum. So, you know, for his first couple of years while his business was getting on its feet, I was our sole support. And we did keep on having children. And so they don't pay assistant professors that much. So I was looking for ways and means of earning a little extra money without taking up prostitution in the home. And I said, you know, what do I know how to do? Well, I know how to write, and I am an expert in scientific computation. So I sent very brief query letters to the editors of Byte and InfoWorld and PC Magazine and all the computer press. And with it, I included a copy of my journal, Science Software Quarterly, with Self as editor-in-chief, and a copy of a comic book that I'd done for Walt Disney's Educational Media Division a few years earlier, titled Nutrition Adventures with Orange Bird. And as I say, it was a very brief query. It said, "Dear sirs, as you can see from the enclosed, you won't find anyone who knows more about scientific and technical software than I do, and at the same time can write so as to appeal to a broad popular audience." Well, this got immediate results, and, you know, within a year I was making as much freelancing as I was at the university, which, as I say, just goes to show how badly they pay assistant professors. But, and there's actually a reason why I'm telling you this. It has to do with how I got published. As a result of the software reviews I was writing, one day Byte sent me a package to review, and they sent me also a trial membership to CompuServe. Now, this was the mid-1980s. It was long before America Online, long before, free web access and so forth. We had the three big information services, Genie, Delphi, and CompuServe. A number of you are probably old enough to remember those. And CompuServe was the largest. Well, they said, this particular vendor has a online support forum, which is new, sexy, cutting-edge kind of thing, and they want you to mention it in your review, so we're giving you this trial membership so you can go check it out. So I did, and that took about an hour. I had 4 hours of free connect time left. Well, that was back in the day when they charged you $30 an hour to be connected. So I said, what else is in here? Not wasting $120. So I began poking around, and I stumbled into a group of people called the Literary Forum. Now, these were people who liked books. It wasn't a writers group, but there were some writers there. It was mostly just people who liked to talk about books and writing. It was like a 24-hour literary cocktail party. And for someone with 2 full-time jobs and 3 small children, it was the ideal social life. So I'd been hanging around there for quite some time before I began writing a book. And when I did, I was not going to tell any of these people that I knew what I was doing, because I'd seen a lot of people come through, talking about what they were going to do, but all they did was talk. You'd never see a word. And I said, well, I'm going to wait till I've actually written a book, and then I'll see if I want to talk about it. So I was just writing along, but one night I was working late. I always work in the middle of the night. I mean, you do that when you have small children, and it just suits my biorhythm. And I was having an argument with a gentleman online, sporadically back and forth messaging every half hour or so about what it feels like to be pregnant. And he said, oh, I know what that's like. My wife's had 3 children. I laughed. I said, yeah, Buster, I've had 3 children. He said, can you tell me what it's like? I said, I can, but it's sort of complex. I'm not sure I can explain it in a 30-line message here. I said, but I tell you what, I have this piece I wrote in which a young woman explains to her brother in some detail what it's like to be pregnant. I said, I'll put that up and in the library here, and you can read it. So I did, and everyone who'd been following the conversation went and read the piece. They came rushing back. They said, this is cool. What is it? I said, I don't know. And they said, well, where's the beginning? And I said, I haven't written that yet. And they said, well, put up some more of it. This is fascinating. We want to hear more about these people. And I don't write with an outline, and I don't write in a straight line, and I don't plan the books out ahead of time, which is one reason why they're long and weird, and it takes a long time to write them. But I lost my thread of thought. So let me have a quick sip while it comes back. Right. Yeah, so back to the CompuServe forum and so forth. And so I was going to put up pieces for them, but these were not chapters. I don't have chapters until the last thing before I send a manuscript to my editor. And so these would just be 5 or 10 page scenes that would stand without a lot of explanation. So I'd put these in the library every 2 or 3 months, and people got more and more excited about it. And they say, oh, Diana has a new chunk. Have you read it yet? What do you think's going to happen? And why did this happen? And so they talked to me about it. It was, catnip to a writer, to have people care about what you write. As those of you who are writers know very well. So, I kept doing it. And I began asking questions of writers, because everybody kept saying, well, you should try and publish this. And I said, well, it doesn't really have a genre exactly, and I think you need that. But, eventually I'm going to write a book I want to publish. So, out of curiosity, what should I do? And I was friends with a number of working writers by this time. They were all very kind about sharing their stories and information, and every single one of them said, get a literary agent. They said an agent can do 2 things for you. He or she can get your manuscript read much more quickly than if you're sending it to a slush pile. And if it does sell, he or she can negotiate a much better contract for you. And this is true. My first contract ran 12 pages of subclauses, and it's only owing to the perspicacity of my first agent that I retained my T-shirt rights and my action figure rights. Yeah. Yeah, my husband says he can't wait to see the Black Jack Randall action figure. Yes, but the point is that I actually had those rights when we finally did the contract for the TV show. So now, in fact, the Sony Corporation has the T-shirt rights and the action figure rights, but I'm sure they will do something creative with them. We'll have to see. But anyway, so I said, well, this makes sense. How would I find an agent? And they gave me advice. They said, writers' conferences have agents. You could go talk to them face to face. Writers Digest has lists of agents. Join one of the genre-specific organizations like the RWA or SIFWA or whatever. They keep lists of agents who handle that particular genre. Look in the acknowledgments of books you like that are like yours and see if they acknowledge their agent. Read Publishers Weekly. They said, or you can just talk to people who have agents. I said, that seems like the one I want to do. What with the 3 small children and the 2 jobs and all that. And so just whenever I was in conversation with someone who I knew was a published writer, I'd say, well, would you mind telling me about your agent? You have the same one you started with. If not, why not? If you write more than one kind of thing, do you have more than one kind of agent? And how does it all work? And they were very kind, as I say, about sharing their information. And I began gradually zeroing in on this gentleman named Perry Knowlton, who, he lived in New York. I wanted someone who had lunch with editors. He was a long-established agent. He represented several best-selling authors. And he wasn't afraid of long books or of unorthodox books, both of which it has struck me I had. And so he seemed like a good bet, but I didn't know how to get at him. He didn't take unsolicited queries. So I said, well, just go on asking questions. Either you'll figure it out or you'll find another agent. And so I did. And one day I was talking to John Stith, a friend who writes science fiction mysteries. And I was asking him about his agent. And he said, oh, yeah. He said, by coincidence, his name is Perry Knowlton. He's the same as so-and-so's. And I said, oh, that's great, John. And he said, well, I know you're almost ready for an agent yourself. Would you like me to recommend you to Perry? And I said, well, yes, John, that would be really nice. Well, I was afraid John would be run over by a bus or leave CompuServe before I finished the book, so I said, yes, go ahead, ask him. So he sent a note to Perry. Now, Perry, God rest his soul, was a much older gentleman who never touched a computer in his entire life. Every bit of correspondence I got from him was on his, very elegant gray stationery typed on a manual typewriter. And so it was just an ordinary note, sent through the mail. And the story is always, somebody read her book on CompuServe and snatched her up, and that's not how it happened at all. It was exactly what anybody else would do. You do your research, you make connections, you query the agent, and if all goes well, then all goes well. In my case, I followed that up with my own query letter, and it said, Dear Mr. Knowlton, I've been writing and selling nonfiction by myself for some years now. In other words, I do know one end of a sentence from the other, and people are willing to pay me for it. And but now that I'm writing a novel, I understand that I need good literary representation. In other words, I have actually researched this. And you've been recommended to me by John and Judy and Carol and Cherry and all these other people whose opinions I respect, as in I have researched you, and these are the people who you represent. You can ask them about me. And it's just a lot of information to convey in 2 sentences, And the main purpose of a query letter is to prove you can write. Yeah, do that. And the secondary purpose is to prove that you have an interesting story to tell. Well, I couldn't do that because I've never been able to describe my books in 25 words or less, which is about what you need. So what I said was, I have this very long historical novel. I don't want to waste your time. Would you be willing to read excerpts from it? Well, I didn't tell him I wasn't through writing the book. Excerpts were all I had. But he very kindly called back and said, yes, he'd read my excerpts. And so I hastily wrote a 26-page single-spaced synopsis and sent it with my excerpts. And he took me on the basis of an unfinished first novel, which it wasn't common then. It's not common now, but it was very lucky. And so 6 months later, I finally finished the book, and I sent it to Perry. And I said, well, I can tell that there's more to this story, but I thought I should stop while I could still lift it. I said, but, if anyone is interested, you can tell them there's more. And so he said, great, I'm going to send it out today to 5 editors who I think might like it. And he told me who they all were and what he thought about them. And I was saying, this is great. How long do you think we might have to wait for an answer? Because I'd been reading Writer's Market, and it says, 18 months, 2 years for a reply. And he said, I've told them I want an answer in 30 days. And I'm thinking, oh, well, you picked the right agent, didn't you? So anyway, I went home to wait for 30 days. On the 4th day, I got a call from Perry. He said, on my answering machine, this is Perry. I've just called to update you about your manuscript. Give me a call back. And I was thinking, well, at least one of them looked at it and said, here, I'm not reading a 10-pound book. Take it back. And so I called up expecting to hear that. And instead, he said, well, of the 5 I sent it to, so far 3 of them have called back with offers to buy. And so, thanks. Thank you. Yes, yeah. Well, so he negotiated amongst them for 2 weeks, and he told them, she says there's more, and they said, trilogies are very popular. Do you think she could write 3? And being a good agent, he said, oh, I'm sure she could. So they gave me a 3-book contract. Bing, I was a novelist. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah. Now, I'd just like to point out that I never said it was a trilogy. I just said there's more. And luckily for all of us, there still is more. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Well, this is Moby, which you all have in your bags now here. Very happy? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes. And now there will be a 9th book because there's more, you know. And the only other thing I wanted to show you before we start asking questions is the interesting movie tie-in edition of Outlander. Yeah, you call it a movie tie-in, even if it's TV. But it was kind of a fight to get this cover because the Stars people, they like their poster, which is a very attractive poster. And I said, I thought that was great for, introducing the TV show. But I said, well, for one thing, Jamie looks like a hobbit. I don't want this. And it's just kind of pastel. And they very kindly said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, actually, I've been thinking about that. And what I want photographic art from the show. And I am a consultant on the show, and they do show me stuff. And so I said, I want one of the scenes where they're looking beat up and grubby, blood if possible. I want something that suggests that there's maybe violence and danger in this, and not merely romance. And so I got my way." I'm just good. Thank you. Oh. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we do have time for some questions here.
So what we're... Can you hear us? Lindsay and I have microphones, so Diana can pick, and we'll get to you.
Mm-hmm. Sure thing.
Oh. Hi, I'm Joanne.
Hi, Joanne.
I was wondering how you come up with the titles and if you've already started to work on Book 9 title.
Oh, no, it's not that simple. The question was, how do I come up with titles, and have I started to work on the Book 9 title? No, I mean, it takes a long time usually. The only book where I knew the title immediately was Voyager, because it involves a voyage, which was simple. But and also I like the Mars mission a lot. But no, I think of just sort of evocative words that seem to have something to do with what I know about the book at that point. I just kind of collect a handful and throw them in the back of my mind and let them rattle around. And eventually I pull them out and see if they're shiny yet, and if they're not, I throw them away and start over with some new ones. But it takes a long time. It's just trial and error until I hit on a combination that seems to embody the thematic content of the book and to sound intriguing and elegant and all that. An echo in the bone came basically from thinking of standing on a battlefield and hearing artillery fire around you. But, it was an echo in the blood to start with, and I thought, no, that sounds like a mystery. And I was thinking echo in a flesh because it makes your flesh, vibrate. And my husband was going, you. So, yeah. So anyway, we finally got around to it. Yeah.
We have one over here.
Who's got a...
Hi, my name's Gail, and
Hi, Gail.
my question is, I was looking at the family tree, and I noticed that Lord Lovett's been married to Davina Porter.
Well, he wasn't married to her, he just had children by her. Yeah. You notice it says bastard next to the kids, yeah.
Any more surprises in the family tree?
Are there any more surprises in the family tree? Look at Jamie's mother's middle name. Yeah.
We have one over here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's got to be the people with the microphone picking you guys, because...
Hi. I would like to know, as a writer and as a reader, have you ever read anything that has made you think differently about the fiction that you write?
Oh, interesting question. As a writer and reader, have I ever read anything that makes me think differently about the fiction that I write? Well, actually, interesting question, because writers have no secrets. I was telling my editor this earlier, not that she needed telling, but anything a writer knows how to do is right there on the page. And so over the years and years of reading, I learned to read at the age of 3, and so I've been reading for 61 years now. 59 years now. I can write, but I can't add. And Anyway, you can read a lot of books in that amount of time. And every single thing I've read has influenced my abilities as a writer, either pro or con. You know, I may hit something and think, oh, that's absolutely beautiful. And even if I wasn't analyzing it consciously, I will have absorbed the flow and have seen the pattern that goes through it. And I will read different kinds of books and think, well, this one is very zippy. It moves along really fast, but it doesn't pull you in. And this other one is deeply immersive. You feel like you're right there. And, what's the difference? And you begin to pick out technique, whether consciously or unconsciously. And then there's other books with the negative influence, and you read it and say, well, I'd never write something like that if I could possibly help it.
Okay, I have one over here.
Other way.
Hi, I'm Susie Q.
Hey, Susie Q.
Many of your readers here are people who would read all of your daily lines and excerpts. Many others of us want to to read the book without any foreknowledge. You,
Virgins,
of course,
yes.
Virgins, yes. You, of course, are another avid reader and enjoy many other writers. For your favorite authors, would you choose to read excerpts, or do you choose to come to a new book fresh?
I read excerpts, but I don't go looking for them, but if I come across them, I read them. It doesn't make any difference to me.
We have one over here.
Oh, there.
Hi, Diana. My name is Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. I'm delighted you're here, too.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to, I've always wondered, I know when you write, you feel like it's, you've mentioned before, like it's a good nugget and it's complete, and then you put it out there. And I was wondering in hindsight, from maybe what you've written way far in the past, if there was a scene that you think about now that you would wonder, oh, maybe I could have written that a little bit different. Do you ever second guess any of what you've written?
I never second guess myself, no.
All right, great.
No, my attitude is, and it comes from my first rule, do your best. If I did it the best I could do it, then that is the best I could do it. So, don't worry about it.
Hi, I'm Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. With a K or a C?
C.
C, Catherine.
The Queen's spelling, I think. Old Queens, anyway. So, in rereading Outlander for the millionth time, I discovered that Blackjack Randall's parents are Mary and Joseph.
Yes.
And so my question is...
Yes, that was deliberate.
My question is whether you intentionally insert symbolism, or am I spending way too much time on a wild goose chase, reading a lot of things into things that really aren't there?
Well, some of both, yeah. Yeah, no, I do insert things like that, and there's stuff that, sometimes people see it, sometimes they don't. Almost nobody mentions who the original Jeremiah was and what significance there might be to having all these people named Jeremiah in the story. But things are deliberate. Most of the symbolism just kind of emerges organically as I work. And then there are people who just, spend way too much time trying to read things into everything. If you find it fun, go ahead, but it's not going to hurt anything. Let me take this lady in the front row here. Yeah. Yeah, just ask me.
Hold on. Let me give you the microphone.
And it's her birthday.
And it's my birthday. Thank you. And it's Audrey's
That's
birthday
the crown,
as well.
yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
And Lord John's. Thank you. I almost forgot my question.
You had two.
So I discover most of my favorite authors through going onto their websites or emailing them and asking them who they love to read. And I found you through Chloe Neal.
Oh.
And found her through Kim Harrison and so on. So how do you find, or do you just see a cover that you love, or how do you find the books that you love to read and the authors that you love?
Scattershot, browsing in bookstores, word of mouth from people I talk to. The question was, how do I find books that I like to read? And by this time I have a whole collection of writers who I will buy on site. But new writers, I just talk to other people I know who read a lot mostly. But I read book reviews, the Wall Street Journal, that kind of thing, and I say, well, that sounds interesting. Let's try that. So on. But I do keep something on my own website called the Methadone List. And
yes.
this is These are your books that, I would feel fine about recommending to other people because I really love them. And they come in all kinds of different genres. Some of them come with what you might call trigger warnings for those who maybe aren't as robust in their reading habits as I am. But yeah, and the second question.
Second question is a little bit harder to explain. I came across a really interesting article about time travel and how there's a couple different theories of it, and there's fixed or multi-universe, and so as I know most of us are always trying to kind of figuring out how people got here. But 12 Monkeys, for example, is a fixed timeline in terms of time travel, and that if you go back, you can't change anything.
Yeah.
Do you, or would you even share how you see your time travel theory?
So how do I see my own time travel theory? It's actually not either of those. It's something different. But I stopped reading time travel fiction when I realized that I was writing a time travel book because everybody has to figure out how it works. Is it a paradox? Can you go back and how far and all this kind of stuff. So I worked out the theory, and in fact I was invited to write up the Gabaldon theory of time travel for the Journal of Transfigural Mathematics in Berlin. Which I did, It's a very obscure journal, I'll tell you. But it would take a little too long for the time we have here to explain it. But yeah, I know how it works. The thing is, the people in the books don't know how it works because they're having to discover it by trial and error. There are no guidebooks, which is why Roger and Brianna started writing one. But they're still guessing. So, yeah.
Yep. Hi, Diana. It's Teresa from Outlander Kitchen.
Oh, hi.
I don't know about anybody else, but I do tend to take notice of the food. And so I'm just wondering if you can tell us about any extreme or exotic dishes that we can look forward to in Moby.
Ooh, extreme or exotic dishes in Moby. Let's see. There's a very good seafood stew going on in Section 8, I think. Yeah, that's the only thing that springs to mind particularly. I don't think I did anything really exotic. There's a bit about how to prepare crayfish and so forth. You don't eat crayfish straight out of a creek. You put them in a tub with a couple of handfuls of cornmeal so they can purge their intestines. You eat them before they do that. You'll get really sick. Yeah, so that's the only thing picturesque I could think of. But anyway, you'll see Teresa later on. She's actually running a food event, so to speak.
I'm Joey.
Hey, Zoe.
I'm wondering, the journey. Are you enjoying part A to the epic adventure that we're all enjoying?
Am I enjoying the journey? Boy, you bet I am. Now, life gets more nuts by the minute, but more fun as well. Yeah.
Hi, Diana. I'm Nicole.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi. You said that Claire kind of took over the book, and I'm thrilled to hear there's a book 9 coming. Has Claire indicated how long-winded we can hope she will be?
No, like I say, I don't plan the books ahead of time. I just listen and see what's going to happen. And there are, a number of other people talking in these books at this point. In fact, someone pointed out to me around book 5 that I was introducing one extra viewpoint character with each book. In fact, there are 8 storylines in Moby here. Yeah, so mind you, they all intertwine with each other. So, but for those of you who just say, I only want to read about Jamie and Claire.
Okay, one over here.
Hi, I'm Jerry.
Hi, Jerry. How are you?
I wanted to ask you, as a woman who was very successful in a scientific, with your teaching and all that stuff, and with such an emphasis being placed now on how our educational system isn't promoting girls enough in the areas of science and technology.
They're not teaching anybody science, evidently.
Yes. So as a teenage, my teenage daughter originally wanted to be a forensic scientist, and now she wants to be a tattoo artist. So
make more money.
Yeah. Having been kind of a leader in that area yourself, but also being a creative person, what would you say to someone her age to kind of maybe encourage them to explore this science, technology, the harder sciences?
I'm not sure that you can encourage people to explore science if there isn't any going on in their general vicinity. If the news is all full of, don't even get me started. Climate change. Look, I was in this Museum of the City of London, and it goes all the way back to Paleolithic times. There's a graph there that shows periods of warming, which they can tell from fossil evidence and the remnants of this, that, and the other. Okay, since the Paleolithic times, there have been 3 enormous warming trends like that. Were people around for any of those? No. So, oh my God, it's getting hot, it must be all our fault, No, I mean, well, see, the problem is I'm a Roman Catholic. I went to a parochial school. I can't use the kind of language I need to describe what I think of that. Yeah. Anyway, if you might try books, about interesting scientific phenomena. Space exploration is probably the sexiest thing science has going for it at the moment. Now, the really exciting stuff is in DNA research and so forth, but you have to actually be a scientist to know that. Yeah.
We have a question.
I think we have time
here.
for maybe one, maybe 2 more questions. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Christine. Happy to be here. My question is not literary. Have you ever been thanked and or honored by the Scottish Board of Tourism for what you have done to their industry?
Well, I have talked with people from the Scottish Board of Tourism, one of whom admitted they should be paying me a bounty. But no, they've never done anything formal. It's kind of funny. We were visiting the TV set in Scotland in February. We stayed for 10 days, and I had a cameo and film and all that, but it was cool. But I was talking to Adam O'Brien, their very, very, very nice Gaelic expert, and lovely guy. Anyway, he was so emotional about meeting me, and he said, because he's a big proponent of Gaelic, and he said, I'm just a foot soldier in the effort to preserve the language. He said, you're the cavalry, which I thought was very moving. But, later he was having a conversation with my husband while I was working with the dialect coach, and he said, and this whole Outlander thing has just raised the Scottish economy immensely. There's 200,000 jobs or something like that. It's an exaggeration, but anyway, he said, and it's also regenerated the Borders weaving industry. A couple of factories there were going to shut down, but now they're weaving tartans for the show, so they're all fantastic. No, thank you. Yeah. So my husband turns to me and he says, great, he says, you've saved the Scottish economy, you've rescued the Borders weaving, you've preserved the Gaelic language, what are you going to do for an encore? Oh, I know, you're going to act. Yeah, last question here.
My name is Mandy.
Hey, Mandy.
Hi. Sorry for accosting you in the airport yesterday.
That's fine.
Anyway,
everybody does.
Anyway, I have talked to some of the tour guides in Scotland who are running those tours for a blog post I did, and they are very aware and very grateful.
Oh,
but my question actually is, being raised and grown up in an area of the country where Native American culture was so pervasive and present, how did that affect how you created the Native Americans that have been in the book series? Because it's a very even-handed to me, and very well written. And so I just wondered, was that deliberate, or is that something you drew on your experiences with the culture, or how did that come about?
Well, really not, because I grew up, right next door to the Navajo reservation. So I know a large number of Navajos and Hopis, and I'm familiar with that culture. But it's quite different from the Eastern Shore cultures. I mean, most of the tribal cultures, there were large overlapping groups like the Algonquians and so forth, but they were very distinct, which is why a number of them died out, because they didn't have a high enough population. No, but it's just if you're dealing with any culture that is not your own, you have a duty to research it, and you ask questions and treat it as fairly as you can. And I like to think that I have done as well with the Quakers and Jews and so forth as I have with the and with the gay culture as I have with the Native Americans. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and I think I will now be lugged off to sign your books, so I will see all of you shortly.
Yes. So, thank you. Okay, so we're going to give Diana just a minute to get herself organized before she starts the signing. What we're going to do is ask for anybody who